I was grabbing coffee with a retired detective last Tuesday, a man who spent 30 years looking at things most of us try to look away from. He told me about a call he got early in his career, a woman complaining about a neighbor who stood in his own garden every night at 3 a.m. just staring at her darkened windows. Technically, the detective said, leaning back with a shrug, standing in your own garden isn't a crime. It's just weird. The woman was frantic. She wanted an arrest, a restraining order, a barricade. She saw a predator. But the detective saw a civil matter. He told her to buy better curtains and call back if the man stepped onto her porch. He was calm, rational, and followed the protocol to the letter. He felt he'd handled it perfectly until 6 months later, when that weird neighbor didn't step on the porch, but set the house on fire instead. What struck me wasn't the tragedy itself, but the detective's expression as he told the story. He wasn't haunted by guilt. He was frustrated by the logic of it. To him, the failure wasn't that he was a bad cop. The failure was the gray zone, that silent stretch of time where something feels dangerously wrong, but hasn't yet crossed the institutional threshold of a crime. We watch true crime documentaries and shout at the screen, wondering how professionals could miss warning signs that seem so obvious in hindsight. We blame individual incompetence or broken systems. But the truth is more unsettling. These failures are often the result of people making perfectly rational decisions under total uncertainty. They are patterns that repeat across decades, from the Ramsey House in Colorado to the streets of London. We fail because we try to understand the chaos too quickly, or because the system isn't built to see what's staring it in the face. The crime doesn't begin when it hits the news. It begins in the silence of the weeks before.
Right. It's a terrifying thought when you really sit with it, that the system can function exactly as it was designed to. Protocols followed, boxes checked, laws completely obeyed, and the result is still a burnt down house.
Yeah.
Because that detective wasn't lazy. He was operating within a definition of crime that was just too narrow to catch the actual reality of danger.
That's the part that really stuck with me. He kept saying, my hands were tied. And it made me realize that we treat the law like this all-seeing shield, but in reality, it's extremely specific. It requires a very specific set of inputs before it can generate an output. If you don't have the input, like a literal foot on a porch, the machine just sits there. It's idle.
And that idle period is what we are calling the gray zone for this deep dive. It's not a legal term, obviously. Sociologically, it's the most dangerous place a person can be. It's that gap between your intuition saying, I am in danger, and the state saying, we can help you. Humans hate that gap.
Yeah.
We have a fundamental evolutionary need for cognitive closure. We need to know, is this a tiger in the bush, or is it just the wind?
Because if we don't know, we can't act. We just freeze.
We freeze or we panic. Our brains, and by extension, the institutions we build, police departments, courts, HR departments, they're engines of categorization.
Yeah.
We desperately want to sort the world into safe and unsafe, legal and illegal, black and white.
Right.
Ambiguity is stressful. It requires a lot of cognitive energy to process. So when faced with something ambiguous, like a man just staring from a garden, the institutional reflex is to force it into a category that makes it manageable.
And in that detective's case, the manageable category was civil matter, which is basically a polite way of saying, not my problem.
Yes. It's a way of resolving the ambiguity without having to do the hard work of an actual investigation. And this brings us to the core of what we're looking at today. We are taking this concept of the gray zone and applying it to a very specific, fascinating context, East Asia, specifically Japan and South Korea.
Now, why those two countries specifically? I mean, what makes them the ideal lens for this?
Because they offer a magnifying glass for this exact problem. You have high-pressure societies, extremely efficient bureaucracies, and these really deep-seated cultural norms regarding harmony and hierarchy. In these environments, the rush to categorize isn't just a psychological quirk, it's a systemic imperative. The pressure to resolve ambiguity is weaponized.
So we're saying that the very things that make these societies function so well, the order, the high safety ratings, the efficiency, might actually be the exact things that blind them to certain types of crime.
That is the hypothesis we are exploring. We're going to see how the desire for a clean narrative leads to the complete erasure of messy truths. And we're going to do that by looking at three specific areas. First, the bureaucracy of policing. Second, the cultural blindness to harassment. And third, the digital lawlessness of the modern megacity.
Let's start with the police bureaucracy then. I heard a story recently about a veteran detective in a satellite city outside of Seoul, a man who prided himself on the harmony of his district. When a young woman from a prestigious university went missing, the immediate, most efficient explanation was that she had simply buckled under the pressure of her exams and run away. In the Confucian-influenced hierarchy of that station, questioning this comfortable conclusion was seen as an affront to the senior's intuition and the city's reputation for safety. I saw a report indicating that the police spent the first 48 hours, the absolute most critical window, categorizing the case as a voluntary disappearance rather than a potential kidnapping.
Which is devastating.
They chose the explanation that required the least amount of paperwork and caused the least amount of public alarm. By the time they realized the runaway narrative was a fiction, the digital trail had gone cold. My thoughts after reading this are quite heavy. As someone who covers these cases for a living, I see this danger of understanding too quickly as a systemic armor. We want our societies to be orderly, and the police are under immense pressure to prove that everything is under control. When they encounter the unknown, they don't see a mystery. They see a threat to the status quo. It's heart-wrenching to think that the very desire for social harmony can become the static that drowns out a victim's cry for help.
There is so much to unpack in that scenario. The first thing we need to look at is that phrase, the danger of understanding too quickly. In a Western context, we might just call this jumping to conclusions. But in the context of Korean or Japanese policing, it's much more structural than that. It's what you could call the architecture of premature certainty.
Architecture of premature certainty. That sounds incredibly formal. What does that actually mean in practice for a detective on the ground?
Incentives. You have a missing girl. You have two potential boxes to put this file in. Box A is kidnapping. Box B is runaway.
Okay, well, box A seems like the one you want to open if you want to actually save her.
If your goal is purely saving her, yes. But look at it from the perspective of the bureaucracy. Box A kidnapping is a catastrophe. It implies a total failure of public safety.
It requires a massive mobilization of resources.
Exactly. It invites media scrutiny. It causes panic in the neighborhood. It disrupts the harmony of the community.
It makes the district look dangerous. And if the district looks dangerous, the police chief looks bad.
Now look at Box B, runaway. A runaway is viewed as a personal failure. The girl couldn't handle the pressure. The family couldn't control their daughter. It is tragic, yes, but it is a private tragedy. It doesn't indict the system. It doesn't require a manhunt. It is a civil matter.
So unconsciously, or maybe even consciously, the system naturally drifts toward the explanation that causes the least amount of headache.
It's the path of least resistance. And in a Confucian-influenced hierarchy, as you mentioned in the story, you have an added layer. If the senior detective, the sunbae, says, she probably just went to blow off steam, for a junior officer to say, no, I think she was taken, isn't just a difference of opinion, it's borderline insubordination.
Wow.
It disrupts the harmony of the station itself. You do not contradict the sunbae.
So you have the harmony of the city and the harmony of the police station both conspiring to keep this case in the runaway box.
Yes. And this brings us to a concept found in critiques of the Japanese police system, which operates in a very similar way. It's the stark distinction between a white investigation and a black investigation.
I read about this in the prep materials. It sounded almost like a switch that gets flipped in the detective's brain.
It is exactly a switch. A white investigation is what we ideally think police work is. You look at the evidence, you have no preconceptions, you follow where it leads. The canvas is white. But a black investigation happens when the police decide, often very early on, that a specific narrative is true. They determine the black theory.
Like, she ran away. That's the black theory.
Right? Or this specific guy did it. Once that switch flips to black, the entire purpose of the investigation changes. They stop looking for the truth and start looking for confirmation.
It's confirmation bias.
But it's confirmation bias on an industrial scale. The massive apparatus of the state shifts solely to proving the theory they've already chosen. And this is where it gets incredibly dangerous for anyone stuck in the gray zone.
Because they ignore everything else.
Anything that contradicts the black theory, what they call white evidence, is viewed as an annoyance. It's just noise. If a witness comes forward and says, I saw her getting dragged into a car, but the established theory is that she's a runaway, that witness might be dismissed as unreliable simply because they don't fit the picture.
They are actively filtering out the ambiguity to protect the clean narrative. This actually reminds me of the statistic we always hear about Japan, the conviction rate. It's like 99.8%.
The famous 99.8%. It's often cited globally as proof of how efficient and excellent the Japanese justice system is. People say, wow, they never catch the wrong guy. But when you look at it through the lens of the gray zone, that number is actually terrifying.
Because statistics like that don't exist in the real world. I mean, real-world crime is inherently messy. It's never 99.8% certain.
Exactly. A 99% conviction rate suggests that the system is aggressively filtering out anything that isn't a slam dunk long before it ever reaches a judge. Prosecutors in Japan are incredibly risk-averse. Because for a prosecutor to lose a case to have an acquittal is a massive professional shame. It's a loss of face. It suggests incompetence to their superiors.
So they only bet on sure things.
They only indict if they are 100% certain of victory. So you have to ask, what happens to the gray cases? What happens to the cases where the evidence is maybe 70-30 or 60-40?
They just drop them.
They drop them entirely. Or they force them into the runaway box. Or, and this is the much darker alternative, they force the ambiguity into certainty. They manufacture the black narrative. This is where we get to a practice known as Hitojichi Shihō, which translates to hostage justice.
Hostage justice. This was the part of the deep dive that really gave me chills. It sounds like something from a completely different century.
It sounds medieval, but it's a systemic reality today. In Japan, if the police have a suspect but the evidence is gray, they need a confession. The confession's the golden key. It turns a messy, ambiguous case into a clean, prosecutable one. To get that confession, they can detain a suspect for up to 23 days without an indictment.
Wait, 23 days. In the US or the UK, you have to charge someone or release them within, what, usually 24 to 48 hours? You're saying they can hold you for over 3 weeks.
23 days. And during that time, you are in the total control of the police. Access to a lawyer is heavily limited. Counsel is often not allowed in the interrogation room itself. And the interrogations are brutal. We're talking about an average of 22 hours, sometimes up to 51 hours in murder cases, just relentless questioning.
And you can't just leave the room.
You have a legal duty to submit to questioning. You can remain silent, technically, but you must sit in the chair.
Yeah.
You have to endure the pressure. And the goal isn't just to get you to talk, it's to get you to sign a chūshō.
That's the written statement, right?
Yes. But it's crucial to understand it's not a verbatim transcript like we see in Western movies with a court stenographer typing every word. The chūshō is a narrative summary written by the detective.
Wait, the detective writes it?
The detective writes the story of the crime based on what they want the narrative to be, and then asks the suspect to sign it.
So the detective is literally writing the script and asking the suspect to cast themselves as the villain.
That's a powerful way to put it, yes. The detective acts as an author. He is taking the messy, chaotic reality of the gray zone and writing a clean, linear story that perfectly fits the legal requirements for prosecution. I went to the house at 3 p.m. I intended to steal the money. It removes all the ambiguity.
And if you're the suspect and you've been sitting in that chair for 15 days, sleep-deprived, isolated from your family, being told that if you just sign the paper, this all ends.
You sign. You trade your truth for their certainty. This system is incredibly efficient at producing order. It produces high conviction rates. It produces a feeling of public safety. But it does so by completely crushing the gray zone. It either ignores the ambiguous cases entirely, like the runaway, or it forces them into false clarity through forced confession.
It's a binary machine trying to process an analog world. And when it fails catastrophically. Like with the missing girl. The system understood too quickly that she was a runaway, and by the time they realized she wasn't, it was just too late.
That's the tragedy of it. The rush to categorize saves time, but it costs lives. And this pattern of ignoring the uncomfortable doesn't just happen at police stations. It happens in our neighborhoods, in our workplaces, and in our social circles.
We're moving from the big police station to the neighborhood police box, the koban, and looking at how culture itself can mask a threat.
Right.
I was reading through some forum archives about a case in a quiet suburb of Tokyo, and it made me think about how the gray zone of human behavior is managed in Japan. There was a young office worker who started receiving hundreds of blank messages and found small, strange gifts on her doorstep. When she finally gathered the courage to visit a local koban, the officer on duty viewed the situation through the lens of traditional social norms. He suggested it was likely a misunderstanding or an overly persistent suitor, framing it as a private relational matter rather than a stalking crime. In a culture that prioritizes, and avoids bothering others with personal drama, her fear was treated as an overreaction. The officer's inability to classify these ambiguous nonviolent behaviors as a precursor to violence meant the gray zone was simply ignored until the situation escalated into a physical assault. Watching this unfold from a distance, I'm struck by how cultural politeness can be weaponized by predators. We often talk about safety in East Asian cities, but that safety often rests on the assumption that everyone will behave. When someone breaks those unwritten rules in a digital or psychological way, the institutions seem paralyzed because there is no template for a crime that hasn't spilled blood yet. It's a reminder that our traditional definitions of harassment are woefully inadequate for the modern, connected world.
You know, the detail about the blank messages is what really gets me there. It's so aggressive in its silence. It's not a threat you can point to and say to a cop, look, he said he's going to hurt me. It's just presence. It's a relentless reminder that I am here.
And to the police officer in the Koban, that didn't register as a weapon at all.
Because the officer is operating on a specific cultural script. In Japanese policing, there is a very strong principle called civil non-intervention.
Civil non.
Yes. The police generally do not get involved in disputes between private citizens, neighbors, family members, lovers, until a clear, undeniable legal line has been crossed.
And that line is almost always physical violence.
Violence or theft, something tangible. But stalking, harassment, psychological pressure, that sits squarely in the gray zone. To the officer, this looks like a relationship issue. And in a high-context culture like Japan, relationship issues are meant to be solved privately. To involve the police is to make a scene.
So the officer isn't just being lazy or dismissive, he's actually trying to follow the social rule of don't escalate. He thinks he's helping by de-escalating it back to a private matter.
He's trying to preserve the wa. But there is also a deeply ingrained gendered trope at play here, the overly persistent suitor. We see this in movies and dramas all the time, even in the West, but it's very potent in East Asia. The man who stands outside the window in the rain. He's not a creep, he's devoted. He's passionate.
Right, it's the whole no means try harder narrative.
Exactly. So the officer sees a man leaving gifts and sending messages, and his cultural filter says, young love, it's messy. He's just trying too hard. He reframes predatory surveillance as clumsy romance. He categorizes the danger away.
And the woman is left completely alone in the gray zone.
And this brings us to the definition of bullying or harassment itself. We tend to assume these words mean the same thing everywhere, but they really don't. The sources we looked at had some fascinating comparative studies on the concept of ijime in Japan.
Ijime. That's the Japanese word for bullying.
Yes. But the nuance is fundamentally different from the Western concept of a bully punching a kid for lunch money. Ijime is often about the atmosphere of the group. It's about exclusion. It's about the collective turning against an individual to restore harmony.
Wait, so the bullying is the method of restoring harmony?
In a twisted way, yes. If someone stands out, or acts differently, or crucially, if someone complains and makes the group look bad, they are often seen as the problem. They are the nail that sticks out. So if a woman complains about harassment in a workplace or a university, she is often viewed as the one disrupting the peace.
She's the troublemaker for bringing it up.
Exactly. The attitude is, why can't you just handle it quietly? Why do you have to bring the police into it? Why are you ruining the atmosphere? This immense social pressure creates a massive barrier to reporting. It keeps the victim silent. And institutions absolutely love this silence.
This connects perfectly to the concept of symbolic compliance that was mentioned in the research.
Yes, symbolic compliance. This is exactly how universities and big corporations navigate the gray zone today. They know they need to look like they handle harassment. So they set up the committees, they establish the hotlines, they print the glossy posters. On paper, they are fully compliant with the law.
But it's just theater.
It's a complete facade. When a real case hits, especially one that involves someone powerful, the machinery actually works to protect the institution, not the victim. The research highlighted the Yano incident at Kyoto University as a prime example of this.
I read the brief on that and involved a very prominent professor.
Yes, a star academic, a member of the elite. When accusations of sexual harassment surfaced against him, the university's response was a masterclass in bureaucratic stalling. They didn't immediately investigate to find the truth or protect the students. They delayed. They obfuscated. They protected what was referred to as the male club.
Because if they admitted their star professor was a predator, the university loses face. They lose mensu.
Mensu. Face is everything. To admit that harassment occurred is to admit a failure of governance. It admits that the family of the university is broken. So they prioritize the reputation of the powerful man over the safety of the vulnerable women. They use the ambiguity of the situation, saying things like, oh, it's a he said, she said, or it's a complex academic relationship, to delay any real action.
And while they delay, the victim is basically living in hell.
The victim is living in the gray zone. They aren't getting help, but they also aren't getting a clear no from the administration. They're just suspended in limbo. And this silence, this symbolic compliance, acts as a shield for predators. As long as they don't leave a physical bruise, as long as they don't do something that forces the police to act, they can operate in that gray space for years.
It seems like the common thread here is that the system demands a body before it believes there's a crime. Physical evidence is the only currency that actually matters.
And that is a profoundly dangerous mindset in the modern era. Because the fastest growing crimes today don't leave physical bodies. They don't leave bruises. They happen on servers, in the cloud, in the digital ether.
That brings us to our third and final section. We're leaving the quiet suburbs and going deep into the heart of the megacity. Try to imagine a high-rise apartment complex in the heart of Seoul, a forest of concrete where thousands live side by side yet never speak. I came across a thread about a new type of digital exploitation ring that targeted socially isolated youth living in goseiwons. These victims were being coerced into complex financial fraud through encrypted apps. When the families of these youths finally noticed the signs, the sudden debt, the extreme isolation, the police were baffled. Because there was no physical crime scene and no traditional gang structure, the investigators struggled to even name what was happening. They were looking for old-school criminals in an era of hyper-urbanized digital ghosts. The rapid pace of change in these megacities has created a vacuum where law enforcement is effectively using a 20th century map to navigate a 21st century labyrinth. Looking at this as someone who analyzes systemic failures, I feel a sense of profound frustration. We are building these massive high-tech urban environments, but our investigative templates are lagging decades behind. It's not just a lack of technology, it's a lack of imagination. The gray zone here isn't just a legal loophole, it's the gap between the world as it was and the world as it is now. We are so focused on the efficiency of the city that we've forgotten how to police the shadows created by its own growth.
The forest of concrete and the goseiwon. We really need to paint a picture of what a goseiwon actually is for you listening, because it's so crucial to understanding the mechanics of this kind of crime.
It's essentially a cubicle you sleep in, right? Like a tiny dorm.
It's smaller than a cubicle in many cases. We're talking about a room that is maybe 3 to 5 square meters. Just enough space for a narrow bed and a small desk. No kitchen, usually shared bathrooms down the hall. Originally, they were built for students studying for their exams, hence the name gosei, meaning exam. But now, they are the housing of last resort for the urban poor, the unemployed, and the deeply socially isolated.
So you have thousands of people living in these tiny boxes, literally stacked on top of each other, but completely anonymous.
And that extreme physical isolation is the perfect breeding ground for digital predators. In a traditional village, if someone is in trouble, the neighbors notice, hey, June hasn't come out in 3 days. Hey, June looks really stressed. But in a goseiwon, you can disappear while being surrounded by 1 million people. Nobody knows you. Nobody checks on you.
The story mentioned the nth room case as a parallel to this. That case really blew the lid off the digital gray zone in Korea.
The nth room case is arguably the defining gray zone crime of our generation. For anyone who doesn't know the gruesome details, it was a network of hidden chat rooms on Telegram where users paid cryptocurrency to watch videos of sexual exploitation. But the key, the absolute horror of it, was a method of coercion.
It wasn't kidnapping in the sense of grabbing someone off the street and throwing them in a van.
The perpetrators, using aliases like Boxa, which means the doctor, and God, would hack into a victim's accounts, or find sensitive information, or even pose as recruiters for high-paying modeling jobs. They would get just a little bit of leverage, maybe a mildly compromising photo, maybe personal info, and then use that to blackmail the victim into filming a more degrading video.
Do this, or I send the first photo to your family, or your school, or your boss.
And once they had the second video, the leverage got stronger. It was a ratchet. They turned the victims into slaves. That was the actual term they used, controlling their every move, forcing them to carve words into their bodies, forcing them to perform horrific acts. But the victim was physically alone in the room. The chains were entirely digital.
And this is where the template problem comes in. The police look at this and say,
initially, they didn't know what to say. The police template for trafficking involves physical transport, physical restraint, physical safe houses. Here, the victim is sitting in their own goseiwon, holding their own phone, filming themselves. To a 20th century legal mind, that looks like voluntary production of pornography.
They see the action, the filming, but they completely miss the coercion, the blackmail.
They miss the invisible gun to the head.
Yeah.
The law had a massive blind spot. Initially, mere possession of this material, if you didn't distribute it yourself, wasn't even criminalized in the same way as physical child abuse images were in other jurisdictions. The consumers, and we're talking about tens of thousands of them, viewed it as entertainment.
That was the most disturbing part of the research, the entertainment defense.
It's the dissociation of the screen. Because it's happening on a phone, in an encrypted chat room, it feels like a game. It feels like content. The perpetrators and consumers convinced themselves that because there was no physical contact, there was no real harm. They treated real human torture as a gotcha game or a sick reality show.
And because the law was so slow to catch up, because the police were looking for traditional gangsters in dark alleys instead of teenage coders in their bedrooms, the public just lost their minds.
They completely lost faith in the state's ability to protect them. This is where the digital prison comes in.
The vigilante site.
Yes. A website appeared that started doxing these offenders, publishing their real names, their faces, phone numbers, school information. The message was, this guy is a predator. The judge let him go with a slap on the wrist, but we won't. It was chaos responding to chaos. The public realized the gray zone was full of monsters, and if the police wouldn't turn on the lights, the mob would burn the house down.
It's a complete breakdown of the social contract. You protect us, we follow the law. If you don't protect us,
we take the law into our own hands. And we can't gloss over the gender aspect here, particularly in South Korea. This is happening against the backdrop of a fierce, highly polarized gender war.
These crimes, the nth room, the molka or spy cams, they are overwhelmingly targeting women.
Overwhelmingly.
Yeah.
And the investigative bodies, the police, the prosecutors, the judges, are overwhelmingly male. Historically, there has been a profound cognitive failure to understand the violence of data. An older male judge might look at a deep fake or a spy cam video and think, well, she wasn't physically assaulted. It's just a picture. It's embarrassing, sure, but is it violence?
They don't understand that in a digital society, your digital identity is you. To have that violated is a form of total destruction.
Exactly. A deep fake can destroy a career, a reputation, a life, just as effectively as a physical assault. But the legal template measures harm in bruises and broken bones. Until the template changes, women are living in a massive gray zone where they can be destroyed without ever being touched.
It's honestly overwhelming when you see it all laid out like this. We've gone from the satellite city police station to the quiet Tokyo suburb to the digital underground of Seoul.
And despite the different geographies and the different technologies involved, the pattern is identical.
We're really looking at three distinct failures.
First, you have the bureaucratic failure. This is the story of the runaway. The system prioritizes the clean narrative to maintain efficiency and harmony. It actively filters out the messy truth because the truth requires too much paperwork and invites too much shame.
Second, the cultural failure. This is the story of the stalker. The system prioritizes social order and privacy over individual safety. It reframes predation as romance or just interpersonal conflict to avoid the awkwardness of intervention.
And third, the structural failure. The story of the nth room. The system tries to apply 20th century templates to 21st century crimes. It fails to recognize that the very nature of harm has evolved and that digital chains are just as strong as iron ones.
And in all three cases, the gray zone isn't just an empty void. It's not that nothing is happening there.
No, it's crowded. It's loud. It is heavily populated by warning signs, the neighbor staring at the window, the sudden silence of the student, the blank messages, the unpaid debts. The signs are screaming.
But the system is deaf to them.
The failure isn't that the signs were invisible. The failure is that the system requires certainty before it can act. It demands a crime be fully formed, fully black, before it can offer protection. It's a reactive machine in a world that requires proactive empathy.
It demands that you become a victim before it will treat you like a citizen.
And until we figure out how to police the gray zone, how to investigate the weird feeling, how to validate the nonviolent threat, we are going to keep seeing these tragedies. We are going to keep seeing houses burned down because the detective couldn't arrest a man for standing in a garden.
We tend to think of safety as a wall, a solid barrier provided by laws and police. But looking at these cases, it becomes clear that safety is actually a net, and the mesh of that net is woven out of our willingness to tolerate ambiguity. When we demand that every problem fit a neat, pre-existing template before we pay attention to it, we aren't creating order. We are simply widening the holes in the net, making sure that when the new, the strange, or the quiet dangers finally arrive, they pass right through us, invisible until the moment of impact.